Тисячі вже полягло, і все більше шлепуйло, то для них нема нічого, крім труни. Going home, Russian soldiers, going home. Бо ми всіх вас тут змішаємо з багном. Від стрия до волновахи і чудно кличе дітей нахуй. Тут працює ЗСУ і ТМО.
Вызволять пришел, братишка, ну привет!
поспішаємо з балкон. І стріля до Волновахи, чутно кличні діти нахуй собачує.
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страны.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння, різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів. Робить примар. Байрактар. Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить. Хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар? Байрактар. Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ. Тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар. Байрактар. Байрактар.
Байрактар.
Байрактар.
everyone, I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome to day 120 of the news. And luckily, we bounced back like a leaf spring from those issues, and hopefully we are smooth sailing for the rest of the night.
Just for y'all to know, at the very start of the stream, and some of y'all may be wondering why the stream is actually a little late. It's around 10 minutes behind schedule, and the reason why is because we actually suffered a DDoS attack within the first 2 minutes of our very first stream, throttling our stream's kilobytes per second down to 0 and stopping it dead in its tracks. Matthew and me have tried our best to make sure that we can secure new efforts to ensure the safety and security of the stream, and hopefully this one will not be attacked and knocked off the internet for the rest of the night. But with that in mind, it once again is a testament to our viewers and also the Leaf Spring Army as a whole that we managed to not only get around the stream, or get around the DDoS and start another one, but we were able to also keep most of our viewers as they hopped right back onto the second stream and are with us once more. And so with that, welcome once again everyone to the Day 120 News. We're going to cover the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine, and just like this stream has rebounded from the tough times it just had, Ukraine has also had some tough times of its own today on the front lines, but has rebounded in the terms of international support it has been able to garnish for itself today. And so with that, let's get right into today's schedule. First, we're going to be starting off in Kyiv, and unfortunately we did not get an address from President Zelensky. I may pull up the Office of the President of Ukraine's website later on and see that he finally made an address, but when I was compiling this news, there was no speech from today addressing the State of the Union, I guess you could say, in Ukraine. So unfortunately, all we have is a little bit of news from Kyiv, which you just got a sneak peek of, which we will touch on here in a second. It's huge news. With that, we're then going to move into the location unknowns and cover all of the location unknowns. After we do that, we're going to move towards the Kharkiv and northern Donbass area, but before we actually get there, we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat, and of course, answer those questions. After we answer those questions, we'll then move to the Kharkiv and northern Donbass regions, and once we get done covering that area, we'll then be moving on to the southern front and the international news, which will include both the Russian news, Belarusian news, and the Western news as a whole, along with the southern front. But before we actually get there, we're of course going to take a stop in Orlivka to answer another 3 questions from the chat, and after we get done answering those, we'll then move on to the remainder of the news, and if by that point we do have the speech from Zelensky, and I can find that on his website, we'll then go over the speech. If not, the news will conclude with the news that we got in the US today. And so with that, we have an incredible load of news, of course, tonight as well. 43 pieces of news total, a massive amount, one of the largest amounts we've had on stream lately, and so we've got a whole lot of news to cover, and so with that, let's get right on schedule. Starting off with our first bit of news, maybe the biggest bit of news we've gotten. The country of Ukraine has been approved by the European Union to become a candidate for member status of the European Union. And we just saw that here in this news article, where we were told that Ukraine has moved to the next level, and also we got a small address from Zelensky saying the exact same thing. Now, since we don't have a speech from President Zelensky, I am going to run this little, well, unfortunately it's not a video, apparently I was thinking about another one, and that was like 19 minutes long, but I was going to play that one near the end if we didn't have a speech. But we can see here that we don't have one, sadly. But they did get accepted as a candidate for an EU member state, and that is getting one step closer to actually being a member of the European Union. There has been a small amount of backlash, however, in some of the European countries. For example, France's Emmanuel Macron states that this is no direction to try and create a peace agreement with the Russians, and this is going in the opposite direction. We'll have to wait and see if that's true. But as far as I can tell, I believe he's actually the only public figure within the European Union who is speaking against this step in the direction of making Ukraine a member state. With that, we're now going to move out of Kyiv and into our location unknowns immediately. And we have some very interesting ones to cover today. And of course, we get to see what the bots are seething about. Starting off in our first bit of location unknown news, we've seen the Ukrainians attack a Russian, I guess you could say commandeered Lada. It looks like they were able to hit it straight through the windshield and knock out the car. And so, here's the video. You can see here the faint outline of the Z on the Lada, and we can now see the bomblet making its way towards the car. Have to say, it was really cool to watch it puncture the windshield. It went straight through and blew up in the car, and you can actually see that it didn't destroy the windshield, and you can see the hole where it entered the car and then exploded. That's something I didn't expect. I thought it would blow out the whole windshield, but that windshield is apparently made out of stronger stuff than the Russian army. So good job on the windshield, and a poor job on the Russians' part in ensuring that their little Lada here, painted blue, kind of a rarer color for a Lada, is no longer running or intact. Having a bomb fall straight onto the dashboard and explode, I'm assuming, knocks out the car. With that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of location unknown news, where we can then see Russian artillery units being destroyed by Ukrainian counterfire. This group was graciously highlighted by the Ukrainians who made this video. I've got to say, the editing that the Ukrainians sometimes do on these videos is really comprehensive. We can see them highlighting some of the artillery pieces here and there. These are hidden amongst brush that they put on top of the artillery piece. Right there, it'd be a little bit hard to hide that one, considering they have a massive pile of shiny brass right near it from all of the shells that have been fired. And that once again goes to show y'all that the Russians do none of this shooting and scooting kind of stuff, because just look at the raw pile of brass that's near this artillery piece. Most likely over 50 rounds fired from it in that one spot, and that lets us know that this artillery unit from the Russian side has not moved once it got there. It's set up and has stayed there, and it's an incredibly lazy move by that artillery unit. Any smart artillery units that we've seen on the Ukrainian side fire, and then they pack up and leave and go to another spot. The Russians, on the other hand, of course, with their poor training, corruption, and the like, just sit there in one space and just keep on firing the artillery pieces until they eventually get hit and knocked out. We can now see the Ukrainian artillery, of course, coming in on this lazy conscript unit, and we can now see that these soldiers are most likely wishing they hadn't joined the army, and we can see them running back to the recruitment office to make sure that they are not contract soldiers. Now we're seeing the burning wreckage of the Russian vehicles and equipment. And now we're watching more artillery land on this large artillery base. It's actually incredibly expansive, and it looks almost like a FOB or some kind of a fire base you would have found in Vietnam. With that, that's the end of the video, and it was great to see that the Ukrainians were able to knock out Russian artillery units by and large, and wonderful to know that the Russians are incompetent and the artillery units usually keep in one place. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see Ukrainian Tajka battery firing. This is something rare. We have not seen this from the Ukrainian side before, but now we've seen the Ukrainians fire 3 Tajkas en masse from a single battery. Here we can see the Tatchkas being lifted out of their carriages, I guess you could say, and being prepared to fire. Hence the black plumes of smoke billowing out of the back of the Tatchkas, and you're about to see them all take flight. Supposedly, all 3 of these Tajka ballistic missiles are being targeted towards a single Russian armory, one of the largest in the area, and the hopes are that one of these Tajka ballistic missiles will make it to its target and hit the ammunition storage dead on, destroying massive amounts of Russian supplies. We're not really sure as to the success of that attack. We haven't heard anything about it. And then there's just this random... I kind of found this funny, honestly, but there's just this random Ukrainian soldier standing in the background, just aiming a Stinger out into the distance. I think he may be looking for drones that are surveying the area and trying to find this Tajka battery, and if he is, very diligent on his part. If he isn't, I don't know what he's doing, but still, a very good video, and hopefully one of those Tajkas hit its target. That's the end of the video, and great to see that the Ukrainians are trying to up the ante and make sure to take out Russian supplies as much as possible. With that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of location unknown news, where you can see the Ukrainians ambushing a Russian convoy. This is something straight out of a, I guess you could say, a war movie with how this ambush was conducted, and so I'm just going to let y'all see it. It's a somewhat shorter clip. They just pop up from the side of the road and they start shooting into the convoy that's further to the left of the screen. Unfortunately, we can't see it. But based on the firefight that's occurring alone, we can assume that it was a pretty nasty ambush. So now the video loops. An incredible ambush, and hopefully successfully pulled off. We'll probably get video footage tomorrow of a destroyed convoy if it was successful, and if it wasn't, we won't hear about this again. But great to see the Ukrainians take the initiative and try and ambush Russian convoys. We're not sure if it was a logistics convoy or a mechanized convoy. Sadly, we don't know. But still, great to see that the Ukrainians are taking the initiative. With that, we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we see a close call by Russian artillery. Hopefully it loads. Just waiting for it to load. And there we go. And I'm not going to talk during this one. They actually have a speech-to-text translation, and the people in the video are also speaking English. And so I'm just going to let this one play. It's very self-explanatory.
Let's get close, man.
Yeah, let's get real close.
Right. Yeah. Hey.
Everything is okay?
Yeah. We're gonna head back to
Where?
the underpass.
Which
for
route?
trucks.
Which route?
The same route. Same route we came.
Okay.
So we have
Link
extraction
up with
point.
your guys.
Yeah.
That's,
We'll get to the trucks.
that's okay.
Are you coming with us?
That's too far away.
Oh, yeah, man. Are you coming with us?
You know what? If you're not lucky, you'll get it anyway.
Okay.
If you're lucky, you won't get it
All
anyway.
right. Hey. I'll see you next time, brother. Okay. All right, guys. Saddle up. Let's move it out. All right. Fuck. 6. Yeah, let's go. Rock and roll. Fucking shit, my fucking ass. You alright? Yeah. Oh, my fucking ass. Let's go.
All right, so now that the video's over, I will cover it a little bit for some of our viewers who are listening to the stream and not watching it. What happened was that this group of foreign volunteers was trying to make it back to a bridge where there were some trucks. An artillery shell landed close by in the middle of their conversation, and then afterwards they tried to continue moving on. Another shell landed right in front of Lieutenant Ken Ree, and that explosion, according to his words, knocked him on his ass. And we could hear him saying, oh, like my butt. And so apparently he went flying backwards when that happened. It doesn't seem to have injured him. It just seems to have been incredibly close to the point his reaction was to try and hit the ground as fast as possible. Hopefully he's okay. And he did get up at the end and was telling everyone to continue moving on. So luckily, the only casualty of this whole entire exchange here was Lieutenant Ken Ree's buttocks. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the next Location Unknown news bit, and that one was actually a very interesting one, and I'm very happy that they did include a translation here on the side, so that way I didn't have to talk over it and explain what was going on. With that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see Russian artillery firing at the Ukrainians. Once again, I do want to make this note, and I'm seeing a lot of people asking, well, not a lot, it's a somewhat smaller amount, that I don't include Russian videos, but I have to include them, even if they are fake, just to point out how fake they are and kind of combat Russian propaganda, and also to try and show the perspective of the other side during this war. And while I am pro-Ukrainian, I do try and gather as much news as possible from wherever I can to try and show the situation the best as possible. But here is the Russian artillery supposedly firing at Ukrainian forces. We can now see the Russians. I don't know. This is going to be ignorance on my part. This is obviously some kind of military equipment. But it looks like this Russian man here is setting up one of those land surveying tripods, and he's trying to figure out the tract of land that they're on. Of course, that's wrong. It's being used for something else. But still, a very funny picture in my head. We now see grads firing. And we see a Russian writing a diary. We can now see the land surveyor surveying more land, and then the grads firing once more. We can now see them aiming the next grad and then firing again. That's the end of the video, and a hilarious one at that, as they don't really show much of anything rather than the grads firing over and over and over from different camera angles. And so, an interesting video, but it doesn't really key us into much about how the actual front line situation is going. And of course, a lot of y'all are saying, and I see this in the live chat, that this is a training video, but if that was the case, then these vehicles will most likely not have markings on them. But we can see that both grads have a V marking, which means that they are in campaign and in Ukraine itself, as they only get these identifying markings if they actually enter the country. So that does let us know that they're being used somewhere in Ukraine. We don't know where, and we don't know why they made it look like a training video, because I can agree it kind of looks like one. But with that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a real video that actually shows its end result as a Stugna hits a BTR. Everyone loves the Stugna footage, and we've been showing this for 120 days now. And I'd also like to take a note tonight that day 120 is the end of the 4th month of the war, and tomorrow will be the beginning of the 5th month of fighting in Ukraine. And so I just wanted to say that again before we move on to this clip. But here we can see a Stugna hitting a Russian BTR. And some copyrighted music. We can now see the Stugna flying towards the BTR. It's a little tough to see, but the explosion is pretty clear to the eye. And boom shakalaka, that BTR has been knocked out. Great to see. I don't know how many crew members it took with it, but the BTR has certainly been destroyed, and another APC for Ukraine to claim. Great to know, and it's always great to see the Ukrainians toasting up all of those Russian tanks. I'm sure that marshmallows and hot dogs will be in high demand after the war, and hopefully the United States can help provide that and make sure that if there is a food shortage, that food shortage will be averted with delicious American street food. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we see another Stugna, once again with the Arabic interface, which makes it a skiff, hitting a tank. This time, not a BTR, but an actual main battle tank. Here's the video. We can see them lining up the Stugna onto the main battle tank. You can see it there where my mouse cursor is circling. It's on the move.
Есть В-буква, блядь. В-буква на борту, дві.
We can now see them lining up the Stugna onto the tank.
Хуярю в цей. В-буква на борту, бачиш?
Один раз і йдемо. Його розвертає люк. А може більше? Бачиш, шукає цілі.
Ебашим?
Сказал, ебашить и уходим. Наводится. Да, давай.
Ну, тихо.
Давай, наводится. Давай, ебаш, переводи. Или отходи, блядь.
You can now see them getting pretty happy with where the tank is in the wide open.
Пуск.
And once again, Stugna crews have a great deal of freedom with making sure that their shot is perfect. Unlike a Javelin crew that has to be sitting out in the open to be ready to fire their anti-tank weapon, a Stugna, of course, allows the operators to be in cover while the actual launcher itself is out in the open. So this crew can actually sit here for however long they feel is necessary and wait for that tank to get in a perfect spot until they fire that Stugna, because there's absolutely no danger of them getting harmed because they're in a safe location. We can now hear the Stugna launching. We can see the cap falling off and the Stugna missile on its way to its destiny to make a Russian tank a bit of rust. We can see it hit the T-72, most likely dead on.
Пуск!
And it seems that they're firing a second Stugna, and I believe it may be at the same tank, although it is hard to tell from this camera angle. They're now guiding the Stugna on in.
Yeah!
And it's a dead-on hit, and the ammo detonates, causing a large fire and destroying the tank outright. That's the end of the video, and a great one to see, and the crew's celebration is absolutely incredible to hear. It's always great every single time. We've been hearing it for 120 days, but let's go back and listen to them, because it sounds like their team just scored a goal in the World Cup. So let's listen to it again.
Yes! Yes! Сука!
It's great to hear their joy, and the morale in that group is certainly high after scoring a kill on a Russian main battle tank today. Now, backtracking to our last video of the Stugna hitting the BTR, I think I finally know what BTR stands for. Bomb the Russians. I think that's what it stands for, because that thing has almost become a Stugna and anti-tank magnet over the last month of the war. That's almost the only thing we see being filmed and destroyed is a BTR. So I think that BTR stands for Bomb the Russians. So with that, I hope that gives y'all some ideas, and that may be giving us some ideas here on this channel as well as to what the Russians actually anticipated going into this war. Of course, that's a joke. I don't want anyone to sit there, because I know there's about to be someone in the live chat that goes, oh, BTR stands for Berekti, Terlikti, Rokitne, or something like that. And I know that it stands for something else, but just hang with me with a joke there. And so with that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainians coming up with the easy way to do things. Now, there was a famous person here in the United States. He was an industrialist of a sort. Forgot his specific name, but I believe he was quoted to say, and I believe it may have been Thomas Edison, that a smart person is the laziest person in terms of how they work. And I would have to agree that the Ukrainians have become incredibly smart and somewhat lazy in how they're going to clear out these mines on the road. Now, the Russians have set up a string, and it appears to be exactly 7 mines along this roadway. Now, the Ukrainians would usually have to send a group of people out there to try and deactivate these mines and then take them off the road, or some soldiers to just swipe them to the side of the road and then marshal the traffic on through. But it appears that this drone operator came up with a very smart, very efficient way that's incredibly economical in wiping out this minefield. Watch as he uses bombs to combat bombs as a small bomblet lands on the road and pretty much destroys every single mine on it. An incredibly effective and cheap way to demine a road, but there is the chance of losing asphalt, so it does have a little bit of a trade-off, but an incredibly quick and easy way to make sure that civilians don't get killed is using bombs to combat bombs. So with that, we're going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, but an incredibly interesting little clip, and it's great to see the Ukrainian drone operators getting very industrious in how they use their bomblets. With that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we see a local aid center in Ukraine. Now, this is a pretty mundane video, I would say. It's just showing off an aid center, but it's great to know that a lot of the aid that the West has been sending has been making it into Ukraine, and they have set up local distribution centers like this one to make sure that this aid does actually make it to civilians. And so, here's the video.
The command center. Notice the Nokia phones they deliver. They take all the orders off the telegram channel, divide it up by region and place, and then load up the packages into all these cars, supplying a bit of gasoline, and deliver it to all the local villages around Kharkiv. A true Ukrainian effort.
Now, I would love to say that, in all seriousness, it appears that some Western country out there, I'm not sure who provided these phones, but it appears that they have come up with a very smart way to provide body armor. As many of y'all may remember from older generations, I remember as a kid, these phones were still around and being used. Nokias are practically indestructible in every single form. In fact, some of them were even buried in concrete and still survive to this day, and when pulled out of the concrete, are sometimes still operational. A testament to the absolute durability of the Nokia. In fact, someone said that the meteorite that wiped out the dinosaurs was in fact a Nokia that God dropped from space. Regardless of what you believe, the Nokias are being distributed to the Ukrainian civilians here. We can see another group of them stacked up on this side of the table, and hopefully, in all seriousness, these can be put to great effect along with the Starlink system to make sure that these families can contact their extended families in other parts of the country or entirely outside of Ukraine and let them know that they are safe and what is going on. With that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, and where we can see drone jamming weapons. Now, we've seen these a little bit, but of course, courtesy goes to Radio Free Europe, as they made an entire video today explaining what these systems are and how they're used. And so, here's the video.
Чому збираємо якусь розвідувальну інформацію, шукаємо, де там бійці знаходяться наші, або хто там гриби десь збираємо. Починай працювати. Працюю. Дрон вже не підключений, моментально, немає зв'язку з супутниками, немає зв'язку з пультом, на зображенні нічого не видно, я не можу ним керувати. Дроном ніяких пошкоджень йому ми не наносимо, тобто він просто у режимі відсутності зв'язку втрачає координацію, він не розуміє, де він знаходиться, не може визначити свої координати і в аварійному режимі або просто опускається в тому місці, де ми його заглушили, або його може зносити вітром, тому що він не в силах координувати свої рухи. І потім в такому результаті наші військові можуть підійти, дрон забрати, подивитись там точку зльоту, де він злітав, маршрут, який в нього був, відео, там, фото, які він робив, відповідно, считати повністю всю інформацію. Таким чином от у нас виглядають заготовки для рушниці, потім цей корпус вже начиняється електронікою, мікрочіпами, власне кажучи, генераторами, які створюють ці перешкоди, які потім вбивають ворожі дрони. Ну і в фінальному вигляді наш девайс має такий ось вигляд. Це той акумулятор, який ми збираємо, це корпус, який антени закриває. Так, всередині тут начинка повністю електронікою, є кулери, які охолоджують девайс під час роботи. І є всього одна кнопка вімкнення і вимкнення для того, щоб там боєць нічого не наплутав в стресових умовах. Він працює на 3,5 км, до 3,5 в залежності від умов, в яких проводяться. І ще більше, ніж на 100 в нас є замовлень. Основні наші покупці з початком війни змінились. Ними стали волонтерські організації, ними стали меценати або комерція, тобто бізнес, який купує ці девайси точково для конкретних підрозділів, для виконання завдань на передовій. Основною задачею нашої рушниці це є ведення окопної війни і збереження життів бійців. Тому що ні для кого не секрет, що ця війна – це там війна якогось такого нового формування, коли основні завдання виконують саме дрони. Це і коригування вогню, це і скидування вибухонебезпечних речовин, це і збір розвідданих. Як тільки на горизонті з'являється дрон, вони можуть одразу по ньому відпрацювати і не допустити саме цього збору інформації, чи там скинути на них якусь там вибухівку, чи щось на кшталт такого.
An interesting video, and of course, innovations do come out of war, and I believe that this is certainly showing us that this little anti-drone gun has many different uses all around the world. For some of y'all who do not know, and touching on something outside of Ukraine, which may show that drones in general are going to start having a larger influence on the world and how it operates. In Japan, the Yakuza, which is the, I guess you could say, Japanese equivalent of the American Mafia, back when that existed in earlier American history in the 20th century, the Yakuza in Japan actually runs drugs and other kinds of materials around Japan by drone, and the police at the moment are trying to use drones with nets attached to them to catch the Yakuza drones. Now with this kind of weapon being produced and actually being created due to this war, the Japanese may start to find a market for these as well, and may start to use them against Yakuza drones, and we may see police forces around the entirety of the world being equipped with these kind of anti-drone weapons to try and take down these drones and stop criminals with their activities who are also using drones. And so I believe that that little technology there, while in its infancy and the first of its kind anywhere in the world, will definitely be having a long-lasting impact, as it's going to start creating a whole entire area of drone warfare where there is kind of like an air defense system against these drones, while the drones, of course, are operating like, I guess you could say, aircraft. So a very interesting thing here. Matthew actually knows a decent amount about the Yakuza, but that's for another time. That might be a video we make in the future here on this channel, but still, due to time constraints, we're not even sure when the first video will come out. But a very interesting system for sure. And one thing I would like to point out on this video is that I saw a man who was really taking the whole entire drone hunting thing seriously and rigged up his drone gun, I guess you could call it. Let me see if I can find the picture. Oh, come on. It's in here somewhere. Oh, man. Tell me you'll show it to me. Come on now. Right here, I
Є
believe.
всього одна кнопка вімкнення і вимкнення для того, щоб там боєць нічого не наплутав.
I think it's around here.
Він
Let's
працює
give it
на
a second.
3,5 км, до 3,5 в залежності від умов, в яких проводяться.
Oh, come on. Anyways, one of the guys with the drone gun actually had a scope on it, and so this man's using it like a sniper rifle and trying to shoot it as far as he can, and it was no skimpy looking scope. It looked like it had a pretty high magnification on it, and so I think this guy's going to become the Deadeye sniper of the anti-drone unit and be taking down drones with that little anti-drone gun. But really cool, and I love to see the innovation here, and hopefully it will have uses even further beyond this war, and may be able to be used to combat drones such as the Orlan. With that, we're now going to move on to the next video, where we can see a Russian tank burning, something much more practical, and something common that we see here in Ukraine. We can see Ukrainian soldiers waking up among the bushes in these hills to the sight of a Russian tank finally reaching upstream into the mating pond. We can see here that the Russian tank is dispersing its, I don't really know how to say that in a very civilized sounding way, but we can see it here dispersing its spawn as its ammunition shells then explode and shatter about in a fascinating manner, of course attracting the females of its species to the area and hopefully reproducing more burning husks of Russian tanks. A great video to see. We did not see how that tank was destroyed, but based off the fire and the small explosions coming out of the hatches of the tank, we can certainly assume that it was knocked out. that's not really an assumption. I would say that's more of a fact. And so with that, a great video to see, and we're going to move on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a Stugna trainer, and y'all wouldn't believe this, they made something that plays similar to a late 1980s game to train operators on how to use the Stugna, and we can see it in action right here. We can see what seems to be a long line of tanks, kind of like the game of Snake. And we can see this man trying to make sure that his crosshair stays on the tank he's trying to target. He hit one near that tree and blew it up, and then the rest of the little snake continues to keep on moving, and he now gets ready to target the next one and fire the Stugna. I didn't know they made little video games like this with with some of the Stugna systems, but it is really cool how to see the training can be done incredibly simply, and it's very easy for an operator to use because it plays like a video game. I think this does have a market for the arcade section here in the United States, and I think a lot of people will be trying to get their hands on one of these for people to play with inside of their arcades, if anyone goes to an arcade still. But a really cool little video to see, and it's cool to see how training with these modern weapons has really started to become digital and more reflects what we do here at home, like playing on video games or learning tutorials or playing through a VR headset, and that's how a lot of Ukrainian soldiers are training with the more high-tech weapons, like the man pads and also the Stugnas. Really cool to see. And with that, we're now on to our last bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a somewhat sad but an incredibly sweet video as these Ukrainian medics were able to save a poor dog that got into a very tough situation. And so, without further ado, here's the video of these Ukrainian medics doing all they can to save this, what appears to be Siberian Husky. I'm gonna have to mute it. But we can see here they're trying to feed it something, and the dog is licking, and we can see them pouring it some water, and the dog is, of course, drinking the water. And it's wonderful to see that they are trying to save everything they can, and that this little husky here can finally get a little bit of water, and hopefully be saved from this unfortunate area. We can also see what appears to be Shetland ponies roaming around the streets, and it looks like the Ukrainians are also trying to load the Shetland ponies up to try and get them to safety as well. And now we can see a myriad of cats, deer, and puppies that the Ukrainians have saved from the front lines, and it's so great to know that the Ukrainians do take care of everything they can, including the dogs and pets that were left behind by the Ukrainians as they fled the battlefield in fear for their lives as the Russians closed in. Wonderful to see, and I hope that these dogs and all other animals that we saw in this video are able to be taken care of until they can be brought to their owners, or until the war ends and their owners can find them then. So a great little video to see, and very heartwarming to me to know that the Ukrainians do care about everything, large and small, dog, cat, chick, horse, or anything that they can find. And with that, we've now reached the end of our Location Unknown news. We're now about to move into the Kharkiv and northern Donbass area, but as a lot of my viewers know, it is that time of the night where people get their questions answered. And so, with that, we are going to move into the question segment, and what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and it is now time for one of my most favorite moments of the stream, which is the question segment. So, as most of you hear all the time, if you want to put a question in, you don't have to donate. You can always just tag either me or the enforcer, and I will put it in the spreadsheet, and we will try our very best to answer it before the stream ends tonight. So, up first on our Super Chats, we have a $100 donation from Sylvester the Cat. And it's good to see you again, Sylvester. It has been quite a while. Sylvester says, any idea when the German self-propelled guns are due to arrive, or do you think the Germans will keep stalling? Leaf Spring Tanker.
Well, I thank you so much for the support, and it's good to have you back as well. And of course, the massive support is always appreciated because it does help us to keep on running. And to answer that question, we're not entirely sure about the German logistics schedule and how they're going to actually deliver their SPGs that they said they were going to send. Not only have they said they're going to be sending around 20 Panzerhaubitze 2000s, now they're saying they're going to send a couple, I believe about 3 or 4, M270 MLRS systems to Ukraine as well. But we've seen neither of those make it to Ukraine yet or be used. And here's why. I'm actually going to reference a little bit of news that we'll cover later on, but here's a chart showing the energy demands per country in Europe based off of how reliant they are on foreign imports of oil. Well, Russian gas. And so if we click on this chart and enlarge it, credit to this chart goes to CNN, mainstream news network, and we're not really a big fan of any mainstream news here in this channel, but as far as we know, the graph is accurate because they got the source from Eurostatistics, which is run by the European Union. Anyways, we can see that Germany here has to get some 14%. The outline in blue is actually the amount of energy that the Russians import to these countries. And we can see that Germany is up near the top, only beat out by Austria, Moldova, Slovakia, and Hungary. Germany relies 14% of its power grid on Russian gas alone, and the remaining 13% is provided by other countries that are providing gas. And so over 50% of Germany's gas-powered part of their grid has to be run off of Russian gas. If that whole entire chunk, that nearly 15% chunk, was removed from the German energy grid, the Germans would be left with this massive gap in their energy production and also their energy demand that they wouldn't be able to meet. And so they may be scared that if they actually send meaningful support, the Russians may cut them entirely off of, gas imports, and then the Germans will be left with this massive just gaping hole in their power grid that they won't be able to fill until years later. And so I believe that may be the reason why we're not seeing Germany step up and actually send these weapons yet, because we haven't gotten any news, even now, about large German weapons making it there, like heavy artillery systems or anything of the sort. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, and I believe it's incredibly unfortunate. And we can actually see here some countries that escaped, I guess you could say, Russia's ire completely. A lot of people actually said that the United Kingdom relied on Russian gas imports to a large part, but we can see here that they get absolutely none of their imports from Russia. Their imports of gas and oil comes from other sources, and we do know that the British have an oil production of their own that comes from the North Sea. I'm not sure if that provides a large percentage of this portion, but it was very shocking to me to see that 42% of the United Kingdom's power grid relies on gas, and out of that, 100% of it does not come from Russia. So luckily, the British are completely detached from the Russians economically and also energy-wise, and they can make decisions that are completely based off of what they want instead of their power grid needs. Other countries on the otherwise are not so lucky. We can see that France relies an incredibly small percent, so it's negligible. I do believe that their power grid could be ramped up a little bit in other areas to provide for that deficit if there was to be one. But countries, for example, like, say, Hungary, which we just saw everyone was calling him a pro-Russian guy, get elected a little while ago, but it seems that he's pro-Ukrainian as well. Zelensky gave him a lot of credit for supporting Ukraine's candidacy into the European Union, which is a pro-Ukraine move. They rely 25% of their entire power grid on Russian gas. Slovakia, 22%, Moldova, 17%, and these countries are somewhat small, and so their power demands are quite low, and so the Russian imports are actually low in terms of their overall volume, but the amount of percentage that they make up on their energy grid is still incredibly high. It's near a quarter for some countries like Hungary. Austria is maybe the only large country, larger than Germany, that I would consider to be of concern, considering that it is an EU member, and 15%, just 1% larger than Germany's needs of Russian oil, is needed for them to operate their grid. And so that is a little bit concerning, because the Austrians may also be looking at the same issues that the Germans are, and therefore may have the same reservations of supporting Ukraine in fear of 15% of their power grid pretty much being removed. But luckily, most countries don't really rely a large part on Russian imports of gas, as we can see here from this chart. And so with that, a very interesting thing to look at. And I hope that does answer the question, at least in a bit. I think the Germans may not be sending over the support at the moment that they've pledged, and they keep on pledging larger and larger amounts, but we've never really heard or seen of it getting there. And I think that may be because of their fear that the Russians will cut them off from oil imports. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the massive support, Sylvester, and I hope that does answer the question. And also, Slava Ukraini, and Slava the Lee Spring Army. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And real quick, I just want to let everybody know that we have seen your messages about the map not working at the moment, and we are working in the background to try to get that working. Hopefully, we can have it working by the end of the night, but it is a little difficult to work on it during the stream. So please forgive us for that, and we'll try to get it working as soon as possible. So, up next, we have a $50 super chat from Vicky Collins, who says, "Here is a little something for all the behind the scenes instant repairs. Well done to the Enforcer staff and Slava Ukraine. Why do I see two different flags for Ukraine? Yellow/blue and red/black."
I believe that the one you're talking about is the red and black flag, which was actually the flag of nationalist Ukraine back during the, I guess you could say, turbulent times in the East, right at the end of World War I. And so the Ukrainians actually tried to create a state at that point, but then it was quickly kind of quashed by the Russians inside of Russia, and then it became a part of the Soviet Union later on. So that's kind of the answer to that part of the question. Can you reread the first part so that way I can make sure to answer that one a little bit better?
So the first part was, "Here is a little something for all the behind the scenes instant repairs. Well done to the Enforcer staff."
And I thank you so much for the support. And of course, we try our best to keep everything running. And, you know, of course, we just try. So I thank you once again so much for the support and for giving us, of course, the verbal support to keep on going. We do love to hear that people do enjoy our news and also enjoy the efforts we go through to report it. I'd also like to address something real quick that I am seeing in the live chat before we move on to the next question. Someone said that the Panzerhaubitze 2000s are already in Ukraine and there was a second shipment. That is actually untrue as far as video evidence goes. We have not gotten a single video of those Panzerhaubitze inside of Ukraine or operating, and we've also not heard any extenuating news beyond that of the fact of them even getting there. And so, as far as our news is concerned, they're not there, and as far as we can see, there is no evidence to show that the Panzerhaubitze 2000s have arrived in Ukraine. Beyond that, we haven't seen anything from Germany, rather than helmets and such things like that arriving to Ukraine to actually support them. So I hope that does address that, because I just saw them try and say we're behind on the news. We're not. We report everything up to date, and that's something that we've never seen. And so, if you could provide some information as to where you got that from, so we may be able to read that as well. We have not seen that anywhere, and we haven't seen any video evidence of those systems there either. And so with that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment.
And the last question of this segment goes to Gavin Davison, who puts in a $27 donation and says, "Enforcer, hi from New Zealand. I've been watching for months, and I thought I had better make a contribution. Do you think NATO should just transfer whole fleets of legacy equipment like the Bulldog APC from Britain to get the job done?"
Well, thank you very much for the support, and I know there's a lot of longtime viewers, and it's wonderful to hear that some of y'all do step up and help to support this channel because it does help us to keep running, and so I thank you very much for that. And to answer that question, the legacy fleets of stuff, I guess you could say, should be sent over. I feel like it's something that, of course, the Western countries aren't going to use. They're pretty much being held in stockpile because they are obsolete, and so there has to be something found for them to do. And one of the best things to do is just send them to countries that need the stuff. The United States actually sent over a large amount of M1 Garens to the Philippines to help them out, and we're actually getting those M1 Garens back, just for y'all to know as an example there of older guns that we just had in storage being sent off to have a new life elsewhere. And so, for example, the Marine Corps' M1A1 Abrams, which were just decommissioned some while ago, could be sent over to Ukraine, along with those Bulldog armored personnel carriers that you were just talking about a second ago from Britain. And so, in those two perspectives, I can 100% agree that it would be pretty sensible, and I don't really see any reason why there should be reservations about sending over legacy equipment to Ukraine that is still somewhat effective. We can see that the Russians are using by and large dated equipment, and even our legacy equipment is still usually just a step ahead or a couple of steps ahead of the Russian equivalent. So with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question to the best of my abilities. And once again, I do want to give the disclaimer that I may be wrong about some things. I do give my opinion and my analysis on stuff, but whenever I answer a question, do take it with a grain of salt, because it's just based off of my knowledge and my information, which may be a little dated. So with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question, at least on my end. And with that, we have now reached the end of the question segment. So we're now going to move on to the Kharkiv and Northern Donbass news, and we're going to cover those bits, and then after that, we'll start moving on into the Southern Front and answer another 3 questions in between that transition. So with that, we're going to start off in Kharkiv today, where we could see another aid center set up within the city of Kharkiv. This center has pretty much anything and everything you could imagine that civilians in very bad situations might need. And so here's a video showing off what they have.
Добрый день.
Добре.
Що, горох всюди?
Да.
Поки може то на горох один.
There must be 1,000 distribution points like this and tens of thousands of volunteers all over Ukraine, most of them uncompensated. Everybody pulling for the same effort to feed the soldiers and the refugees.
It's a wonderful video to see, and we just heard that the guy in the video was explaining that there are thousands of distribution centers like this all over Ukraine, and it's wonderful to know that the supplies and the aid that has been sent to Ukraine is eventually sent out to these areas that actually need it, and finally, these volunteers, who are compensated by no means rather than their service to their country, are out there trying to make sure that these supplies do make it to the people who need it the most. Wonderful to see, and it's great to know that the support that everyone has all come together to try and do, including our channel and its small part as the Lee Spring Army, raising $250,000 in support for Ukraine, was able to maybe help in this part on contributing to the easing of the suffering and the hardships of the Ukrainians during this war. And so with that, a wonderful thing to see. And we're now going to move out of the city of Kharkiv and towards the front lines. But before we do, I actually do want to check on something, because a lot of people are saying that the Panzerhaubitze 2000s have arrived in Ukraine, and there is some information showing that. But as far as I've been able to tell, there hasn't been any. Let's see, Germany, Netherlands donate 12. Howitzers arrive in Ukraine. But is there any video evidence of that? Because all the pictures here that we're seeing look like they're all from training ranges, like this right here from in Germany. This one also looks to be from a training range and also has the German markings on it, which clearly shows that. And so as far as I can tell, on just a simple Google image search, we can't see any of these. And I know that some people are going to be saying, well, they're going to keep them secret. But why would they keep these secret when they've never kept anything else secret? And it's not really like keeping them secret is giving them an upper advantage. If it's publicly known that they have made it to Ukraine, then why not show them? So I would like to find some more hardcore proof on this. Let's see if this Twitter post has anything. This is once again another picture from a training range showing the Bundeswehr. Well, I guess you could say the Heer marking for the Panzerhaubitzes, which still show that they are under German control here. And we can also see a German plate on the back of this SPG. And so if this picture is the one that everyone's talking about, where the Panzerhaubitzes have arrived in Ukraine, these are on a training field in Germany and still have German plates and German markings showing that they're not in Ukrainian hands. And so until I actually, and because this channel is largely based off of video and picture evidence, until I get a video or a picture showing that these Panzerhaubitzes are actually within Ukraine and operating, as far as I'm concerned, they're not there. I know that they may be there at this point, but without meeting the prerequisites of either a video or an actual picture of them there, they are not there according to this channel. So we'll have to wait until a few days later to see if they are, and then once we get those pictures or a video, we'll be able to say that they are there. Just want to say once again that if there is no video evidence, we're not going to say it's true. There's nothing to actually prove it beyond someone's word, and we've known throughout this war people's words is generally untrustworthy. And so with that, we're now going to move to the Kharkiv front itself, where we can see a BMP being destroyed by the 40th Artillery Brigade once again. So we're going to have to mute this. We're definitely going to have to mute this. But we can see it's a small village, and now it's gone black. And so we're going to have to go to Twitter and pull up the video there. And mute it again, and then put it up on screen. We can see the Ukrainian artillery is already landing at the very onset of this video. You can already see one of the Russian vehicles burning up and cooking off. Looks like we're having a little bit of a toasty in there in the tree line near the railroad tracks, actually, looking like it's leading into a rail yard. And I just saw someone actually say in the live chat here while we're watching this little BMP roast that we need to hire a bagpiper for our own music. And surprisingly enough, I actually play bagpipes. Just in case y'all didn't know that, I think that's a little tidbit I've never shared, but I can actually play the bagpipes. And fairly well from what people told me. But anyways, we did see a little BMP get hit there by the 40th Artillery Brigade. And once again, credit goes to them for the destruction of another APC. While not a major loss, it is still a loss, and the Russians may be getting more and more hard-pressed to be able to replace these kinds of losses. We may see this BMP get replaced by a BMP-1, which is the worser-off version than the BMP-2. Now, I just have to make sure again before we move on to the next one, because I am looking at the live chat, and I am seeing a couple of things that I would like to address. I'm not going to name any names, but someone just said that they can't take any pictures or videos of artillery on the front lines on the Ukrainian side because of security reasons. And if that is what you're saying, I don't think you've been watching this channel much, because that's about all the videos we get is of Ukrainian artillery working, like this video right here, that will be showing us an MLRS barrage on the Ukrainian side near the front lines. So, once again, I'm going to say, I don't know why this one's hurting some people's feelings, but this channel works not off of the word of mouth or just trust me, man, believe me, this is real. We work off of video evidence and picture evidence or news articles that can be proven to be true, which is very hard to come by, and they're not really shown on this channel much. And so, a picture, and we'll pull it up again, Panzerhaubitze 2000s of Ukraine, because someone said read the tweet, and we'll go back and read it. And we're not clicking on these videos. These are other people's videos on YouTube, and I could get copyrighted for that, so I can't watch those. But supply is an example of international cooperation. I highly appreciate the colleagues of the Defense Minister Christine Lambrecht, and I would like to thank the Netherlands and Defense Minister Costa Ollengren. And so that's what the tweet says. It doesn't actually give us any more hardcore evidence than this picture of Panzerhaubitze 2000s on the training field. And so I had to revisit this just to make sure to give the credit to the doubt. Maybe I did misread it, but this does not show any proof of the Panzerhaubitze 2000s actually in Ukraine, rather than the word of Oleksiy Reznikov, which is a Ukrainian official. But until we actually get video evidence or picture evidence, it's not going to be submitted as news here on this channel. And that's the end of that discussion for me. That's how this channel's always run, and that's how I'm going to keep running it. With that, we're now going to move out of the Kharkiv area, past Chuhuiv and Balaklia, where we have not seen any news to report as of today. It has appeared that, once again, these areas of the front have fallen inactive. The Chuhuiv area has, by default, been inactive for months, but the Balaklia area, every once in a while, does see a little bit of action, and it does appear that it has fallen silent today. Once again, the Izum area is still silent. We have not gotten anything to report from there, but in the Lyman area, we have seen the resurgence of a group of people who were the absolute public enemy of the entire world during the siege at Mariupol. The Kadyrovites have actually reappeared again. This time, they're not near Tashkovka. This time, they're not near Mariupol. They're actually near Lyman, from where we could find out where this video was. And we can see these Kadyrovites once again in another fierce fight. I'm just going to let y'all see the video. Of course, it's a Kadyrovite TikTok video, and so take it for what it is. Sadly, I can't play the audio, but here's the video. We can now see them all firing over this wall. It looks like this guy just stood out in the open for a good 2 minutes. It looks like he still is. We can see these guys spraying over the wall, and it's, oh man, it's just nostalgia from Mariupol again. These guys look like they have no clue what they're doing, and they're just wasting ammunition. I'm sure that whenever these guys arrive anywhere on the front lines, the Russians have to account for a massive additional loss of ammunition just by these guys trying to make videos. And now it looks like the video's looping again for the second time. But, oh man, if these guys just got moved into the Lyman area, the Ukrainians are about to have an easy time taking care of defending that area. So with that, that's really all the news we've got to report there. The Kadyrovites pretty much speak for themselves with their prior battle experience in this war, and I don't think I have to add much about how effective they actually are or what they actually look like. They're an embarrassment. With that, we're now going to be moving further down the front, and we're now going to be moving to Severodonetsk, where we can see in the northern area of the city today, a Russian vehicle was destroyed. While I do show this video, I do want to mention once again that the Ukrainians nor the Russians have made any ground in the city, and it is once again in a stalemate today. But here is this video of the Ukrainians using an anti-tank weapon to slam what appears to be a commandeered civilian vehicle that the Russians were using as a supply truck. Here's the video. It actually has music, so let me rewind that. The anti-tank weapon launches, flies straight into the truck, and then the truck becomes a blazing fireball. And now the truck is burning, and with it, the hopes and dreams of that Russian unit that was probably relying on that truck to bring them supplies has now disappeared, and they're going to be eating cockroaches and most likely whatever they can find that's stolen food around the city, if there's even any food left. With that, we're now going to be moving down the front to our next bit of news behind the lines, where we can see some kids that were inside of Severodonetsk on a film. And so here's the video. I'm just going to let it play and show y'all what the kids are like in Severodonetsk now, having to go through the hardships that they've been through.
Как зовут? Саша. Берите паштет.
Ага.
Вот. Что, вы молодцы?
Да.
Давай, право. Денис.
Мне
Право.
молодец.
Ты заебись?
Да.
Все целы, здоровы?
Ну, только сегодня прилет.
Ночью?
Да, да, в доме. 8, где-то я на Буденного ходила пить.
Что, как настроение вообще?
Да, как тот пошел, когда мы спим. Ну, хорошо, когда летят, нам грустно. А у меня 66-й год, сука. Полетели мы все. У него 50.
Да пока карманы есть?
У меня один, у меня не могу.
Что ж вы раскидываете все?
Пойдем, будут машины, мы сейчас машины. Сейчас она, часть. Подвесу. Давай сейчас машину покажем.
You now see them climbing into an abandoned car. I've just been generally letting this video play and let everyone take in the ambience of the whole entire thing. You now see the kid pretending to drive.
Когда в школу ходили? Когда закрыли школу?
23 февраля был праздник моего отца.
Какой праздник?
Ну, день советского, ну, там, День Победы. Я уже не помню.
А где батя?
Он поехал в ЖЭК кормить собачку. В ЖЭК же был прилет, не один. Вот здесь...
Батя на чьей стороне?
На вашей.
На вашей?
Ну, имеется в виду, на украинской.
На нашей?
Я уже, блин, путаюсь. Даже с башка после этих взрывов. А то корабель.
Да? Странно. Такое вот настроение, да? Здесь.
Да, сейчас бы в лайне бы сейчас проходил. А может так...
That's the end of the video, and it's a very sad one, really, when you think about it. Who knows the situation that these kids are actually in? Their parents may have been killed, and they somehow just wound up being left there. Who really knows what the situation is, but it's so sad to see the kids are having to grow up in such devastation and destruction that an abandoned, destroyed car like this is just laying out there in the middle of nowhere. And of course, kids being kids, they're trying to find ways to occupy their time, and they're imagining to drive the car and all that kind of stuff. And it's just sad to think that kids are living in such a place like this, so close to a battlefront where they could be in harm's way at any moment. And so I hate to see it, and with that, we're now going to move on to our next video of fighting from the front, where we can now see combat footage once again from the city of Severodonetsk from the Ukrainian perspective, which is actually interesting because we see this a lot, but this footage seemed to be a little bit more clear than others. And so here's the video.
Window 4.
Anybody got eyes on?
Negative.
And it also sounds like we got the Foreign Legion here.
Do you have your iPro on?
You now hear the other soldiers in the room firing. Oh, look at that! Oh gosh, Matthew! Oh, dude, he's got that 50 cal Hang on, let me... Oh, wait a minute, I can't screen share, I can't show Discord, but hopefully the video catches up here in a second because he's got that 50 cal M82 that we were looking at in the store the other day with the scope and everything. Matthew?
Yes.
All right, and with that, we're just going to let the video play. You can hear some fire coming their way, it seems there. A small burster firing towards their building. You can now see our artillery landing a distance away. We can now see some Ukrainians moving over there on the other side of the street. Almost like these Ukrainians are having a funner time over there as he just sprayed down the way towards the Russians. We can also see an abandoned... Ooh, that's kind of hard to tell. I don't know if that's a BMP-3 or a BMP-2 with the turret looking backwards. But it looks like there is some kind of an abandoned Russian tank down there in the middle of this firefight. It looks like an artillery shell just landed in the exact same spot. And of course the man in the film is observing it.
There you go. That's what they need to be doing.
I don't like this guy. He sounds very calm. You now hear another artillery round explode. For some reason, the audio in this video is really jacked up. I think it may be because the microphone that was recording in this video was busted or something. But it's like bass boosted whenever an explosion happens. But it's good to see the Foreign Legion, of course, doing a lot of work in the Severodonetsk area and still trying to carry on that large battle that's going on in that city. And actually, from what we can tell, holding a significant part of the line and maybe contributing to the Ukrainians' ability to defend that city so well. With that, we're now going to move out of this video and on to our next video from the Severodonetsk area, where you can once again see the Foreign Legion operating in Severodonetsk again. Now, this does have music in it, but I am going to play it because I believe that the ferocity of the firefight in the background should be heard for a second, just to give you all an idea of the firefights that the Foreign Legion is going through and still managing to hold their composure and hold their areas of the front and make sure that Severodonetsk does not collapse and fall into Russian hands. And so, here is the video. You just hear the volume of fire and explosions going on in the background. We can hear that this man is clearly from Britain, a British volunteer. So now that that's played, hopefully I don't get copyrighted. I'm going to have to mute it because now the music drowns out the firefight. We can see him taking some select shots whenever he sees an opportunity. And also, he's got a really nice scope on this gun. Pretty impressed with it. You can see it's a Bren 2. Very nice. I saw someone point that out the other day to me, that the gun I said was a Scar is not a Scar. It's a similar looking gun called the Bren 2. And we can see that this British volunteer here is using one of his own. Unfortunately, I can't play the audio, but when I did play it, the audio was being drowned out by the music in the video. I don't know why people do that. I really wish they would just upload the videos and let us hear the sounds and everything of the firefight. But we could hear at the very beginning it was definitely an intense one, and these volunteers are doing their best to defend a country that they're not even from. And if that isn't a level of dedication and service to the cause, I don't know what is, because that is something that you can't really ask a lot of people to do. You can rarely ever ask anyone from a foreign country, would you go and fight for other people that you're not even associated with whatsoever in a foreign country and help them to secure what they want and they're kind of having a hard time getting. Most people would say no. And these well, actually, there's a lot of them. These many great people from all around the world stepped up with their prior military experience and said, I'll fight for a country that I'm not even really associated with. I don't really know the people, but I will help out in the struggle because I understand what they're going through and I feel that it's a worthy cause. And that's a wonderful thing to think about when you think about these foreign legionnaires, and hopefully they all make it through the war, and they're credited greatly for the service that they've done to Ukraine and its defense. With that, we've now covered all of the Severodonetsk news for today from the city, and the rest of the news that we're going to cover is going to be coming from further down the line, past the area of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. I once again want to say that I made sure to review the news as best as possible today, because I also saw the news being propagated, and this is why I don't really like to check out other people's news, that Lysychansk was going to fall within several days, and there's even been people saying today that Severodonetsk has been completely encircled, and both of those statements are not true. Lysychansk is holding. There's no chance of it collapsing at the moment, although that could change within the coming days. That is not the going rate right now. On top of that, Severodonetsk is not encircled because Ukraine still holds Lysychansk. So I just wanted to get that out there just in case you are watching other news sources, because as far as I can tell, that is not the case whatsoever. So with that, we're now going to move down towards the area of Belarus, where we've seen a Russian helicopter, a Ka-52, once again operating near the Lysychansk area and firing off its rockets towards the city. And so, here's the video. We see it tilting up, and then firing off its rockets, of course in the usual fashion, and being directed towards Lysychansk. While the Russians are not on the verge of taking Lysychansk or even reaching a battle in the city, they are bombarding Lysychansk as much as possible, like we can see here in this video. So with that, honestly, I feel like the helicopter videos are kind of coming a little run-of-the-mill, but I wanted to make sure to show it off again, just so that way y'all can see what the Ukrainians are going up against today in the area, which is more helicopter attacks from the Russians. With that, we're now going to move further down the line towards the area of Tajka, where you can see that the Stugna takes all. The Stugna is the claimer of souls and lives, and it appears that it claimed the structural integrity of this Russian vehicle. I'm not even sure what this thing was before it got hit, but after the Stugna hit it, it appears to have disintegrated it into multiple pieces. I guess you could say the Stugna is the real-life equivalent of the Thanos snap. I'm gonna have to mute it, there is music. I can't even tell you, I mean, like, I wish I could take a guess, but whatever this thing is beyond me. I would guess maybe a BMP, but it's so hard to tell because it's in so many different pieces. Now they're taking a look at a helmet that came flying out of the explosion, and the video ends. We can't even tell what kind of tank that was, but I can tell you it was something, and now it's nothing. And so, credit to the Stugna for destroying that APC. I'm assuming it's an APC through and through. With that, we're now going to move further down the line, and unfortunately, the further we move down this line, we do have a little bit of unfortunate news. I was not able to confirm this through an actual news report, but I was talking to Operator Starsky the other day and asking him about the situation there and what he was able to collect, and it appears that the Russians were able to manage to push back towards the T-1302, and now they are right on it. This is what this article claims. The link actually leads to nothing, so I'll have to delete that one. But this area right here is being contested by the Russians, and so, with that in mind, the Russians have now cut off the T-1302 highway from supporting Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, and this is a little bit of a precarious situation. The T-1302 highway was the only paved highway that was directly from Bakhmut to Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. This other road over here, called the T-0513, is paved, but it goes to the city of Seversk, and then beyond that, we don't really know about the road quality here, in between Seversk to Lysychansk, but one thing that we can tell you is that it's not as good as the normal highways. And so sadly, a large amount of Ukraine's supplies that they're going to have to be trying to get to Severodonetsk is going to have to travel along this one highway and then travel across this lower quality, lower density road where less traffic can be supported. And that means that the supply lines in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk are going to start getting a little bit tighter and a little bit smaller, which means that the Ukrainians may have to draw back their efforts in this area and may be putting them in a bit of a tight pinch. Hopefully the Ukrainians can conduct some kind of a quick counterattack to once again push the Russians back off the highway and make sure that it can reopen for logistics vehicles to use. But right now, this is a situation we're dealing with, and it is certainly a desperate one for Ukraine, as the closing of the T-1302 highway could spell a disaster for the Ukrainian forces in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk. With that, we can see the Ukrainians attempting to break that push that headed towards the T-1302 highway today, where we can see April showers bringing June rocket barrages. But we can see here that the Ukrainians are using Uragans or Smerches, I can't really tell which one they are, to try and level the Russians in the area and hopefully push them back from the highway. With that, that is the end of that video, and hopefully that artillery can soften up the Russians a little bit for the Ukrainian counterattacks to come. With that, we're now going to move further down towards the area of Bakhmut, where we've seen Ukrainian not Kadyrovites, whoops, sorry, that's not at all the case. Ukrainian Chechens that are fighting for the Ukrainians using a mortar to fire at the Russians in the area. And so, here's the video.
Bismillah, Allahu Akbar!
When you see some mortar shells sitting around the ground, and they just fired off this mortar, it appears to be a heavy one, most likely 120mm caliber. He's now dropped the shell down into the mortar, and they fired it again. We now see them firing it again, and then reloading it. We now see them firing it again, and then running up to reload it once more. They are laying down a large barrage with a single mortar. This guy's throwing out memorable phrases with each shot fired. Hopefully the Chechens, the Chechens are doing work on the front lines and hopefully breaking up those Russian forces that are near the area of Popasna. With that, we're now going to move into Popasna itself, where today we can see that the 56th Brigade hit a Russian supply depot in the area. We're not exactly sure where the supply depot was, but we got the general idea that it was somewhere around Popasna, as the 56th Brigade is nearby. Here we can see in the video the Ukrainian artillery taking a look at what would obviously be a supply depot for the Russians and then hitting it with artillery. We can already see that they did that before, and it looks like this barrage is hitting all the surrounding buildings with incredible accuracy. We can now see the supply building over here burning up, which does let us know there were certainly supplies within it that the Russians were using on the front lines. Finally, now moving out of the Popasna finger, which just had some unfortunate news today, but we have seen the Ukrainians trying to regain the initiative, we can now move to the village, or the city, of Alchevsk. Today we saw a Russian rocket launcher blow itself up. A little bit of a twist, and I'm glad to see this kind of a twist in activity. And so here's the video. It speaks for itself.
Это пиздец. Это просто пиздец.
Oh, that's a good one. You can even see the ring of the rocket as it spun back round. Right there. You see it? It launched up, it took a hard left turn, and then came right back down onto the rocket launcher and killed it. I guess this is Wile E. Coyote operating this MLRS, and he just got this rocket from Acme, because this did the complete opposite of what it's supposed to do. And so let's watch that one more time.
Блядь, это пиздец. Это просто пиздец.
I think the Russians that were, using that rocket were probably looking at it fly off and then saw the light getting brighter and brighter. Like, hey, I think that thing's coming right back at, and then they just got blown up. But it's pretty hilarious, honestly, knowing that these MLRSs are usually aimed at civilian areas still filled with people, that this rocket just decided, I'm not going to do that. And it just took a hard left turn and flew right back down at the MLRS that fired it and destroyed it. pretty happy with that result. The Ukrainians aren't even having to destroy the Russians with rockets. The Russian MLRS is destroying its rockets with its own rockets. Very happy to see it, and I hope that the Russians are able to continue on destroying the Russians and helping the Ukrainians to win this war. And with that, we have just covered all of the Kharkiv and northern Donbass news. And so we're now going to start moving towards the Donetsk area and passing through Orlivka. But of course, we have a duty to answer 3 questions from the chat in this area, and I'm going to make sure to not let anyone down and make sure to answer those 3 questions. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and first up, we have a $20 super chat from none other than Kaltenberg, who says, hit the deck.
And that's right, hit the deck. I know when you sent that in, it was right near the start, and at that point, I do highly suggest to hit the deck and slam the like button, because the stream is starting right then as the sirens are sounding. And so thank you so much once again for the support, Kaltenberg. You've been around forever, and it helps out our channel a massive deal. And so thank you once again, and with that, we are on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from WF2U, who believes he has solved the Morse code. And if he has, I must say that he must be a master at it, because he did it extremely quickly. This super chat came in, I think, like a mere few minutes after the intro played. So he says, Enforcer, the Morse code reads, the soldiers of Ukraine will hold the line until the last bullet is fired.
And that is absolutely correct. Congratulations, you were able to actually decipher the Morse code. And you're making it harder and harder for me to keep them up. But I do thank you so much for your incredible skill in making sure to decipher those Morse codes in all seriousness. I find it to be quite a marvel that people are able to do that so quickly. And I think a lot of people in the live chat are very impressed by the people who do have that kind of innate skill within them. And so thank you so much for the support, and you did get it correct. And so congratulations, and everyone give him a huge round of applause in the chat, because that is something that people are able to go through based off of their experience before and decipher those Morse codes pretty much on the spot. And so with that, thank you very much for the support, and good job, man. I'm very impressed. And with that, we're on to the final question of this segment, and then we're going to start moving on to the rest of the news for the night, starting off in Donetsk.
And the final one of this segment goes to Uncle Tababite, who puts in a $20 super chat and says, I'm assuming they're making them bleed for every inch while the big guns arrive. Stay strong, Ukraine.
And that is true. They are making them bleed for every inch. And that's one thing that I think is important to always note. And I don't know, I'm going to have to kind of explain what I'm thinking here for a minute. At the beginning of this war, we saw the Russians take pretty much all of this land at the very start, and then on top of that, they had a whole entire other half of the front line that they were operating all the way from Kharkiv to Kyiv and everywhere in between. And at that point in the war, everyone had a lot of hope and was saying, oh, the Ukrainians could hold the line, push them back, and hopefully win the war. And then we saw them literally dissolve half of the front lines because the Ukrainians were giving them such a staunch resistance, and they were taking on so many casualties, and they couldn't support all of those front lines everywhere. And now the war has gone entirely down to here, and over the course of a few months, we've seen the Russians make small amounts of progress, and even though some of the stuff in context these days, since nothing else that bigger is going on in this war anymore, a small push towards the T-13 highway looks massive. The Russians taking another street or a block in Severodonetsk seems to be the largest thing on earth, but in context of what we were looking at within the first month of the war, this is small business. This is very small business. And so I don't know why everyone's always going, oh, the Russians, they pushed another mile, the Eastern Front's going to collapse, because that doesn't make any sense, especially considering the context of how this war has gone. And that's something that does annoy me a little bit, because I keep on seeing it going further and further, and I think that Russian bots are picking up on this kind of stuff and saying this, because they're trying to, of course, instill fear and hopelessness in people, and they're trying to make it sound like these small gains, compared to what the Russians were doing at the very start, are going to lead to the end of the war for, Ukraine, which doesn't make any sense to me. That would be like going through a car wreck, and breaking both of your femurs and ending up in intensive care for 2 months, and then everyone's like, oh, he can get through it, and then one day you stub your toe in front of your family, and they're like, oh my god, he's going to die. It's not a appropriate response to the situation and also what's happened before. And that's one thing that has annoyed me so far, and I believe wholeheartedly that the Ukrainians can hold on to the Eastern Front. And let's just say that the T-1302 highway is unmanageable. The Ukrainians aren't idiots. They're going to start withdrawing their forces from Severodonetsk and set up a defensive line on Lysychansk, and if the situation gets worse, they'll withdraw from Lysychansk and then reposition their forces further south and probably create a front line across the Seversky Donets River here, and then probably try and create a front line across the M03 to Bakhmut. That's probably what they're going to do, not giving away too much about it, but that's what they'd logically most likely try and, operate. So with that, I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. But sometimes, and I saw someone just say the sky is falling, and yeah, I feel like some people do say that, and I feel like bots are starting to pick up on that and trying to spread fear and pandemonium among people over very small Russian victories. That, of course, I can't say they're defeats. They are Russian victories. The Russians have made a little bit of ground here and there, but at the same time, the Ukrainians are fighting a defensive war, and for the amount of ground that the Russians are getting, the Ukrainians are losing almost nothing in return. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support. Hope that did answer the question. And with that, we are on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to move on to the Southern Front news.
And the last question of the segment goes to William Arrington, who puts in a $20 super chat and says, "Thanks for providing the unbiased information."
And I thank you so much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy it. I am pro-Ukrainian. I always have to say that because, I mean, it's every once in a while you just look at what people say, like bots or, I guess Russian shills or something that are coming on here, and you're like, what? And they'll be like, he's pro-Ukrainian, he's biased. I am pro-Ukrainian. I do support them, but at the same time, when I look at the situation, I'm always unbiased, and I do thank you very much for recognizing that, and I'm glad that you do appreciate it, because it's something I try my best to do, and I try and say the situation as it is. And then also, whenever I say it as it is, sometimes that offends people who want to hear that Ukraine is winning all the time, and then when I say Ukraine might be in a tough situation, then they want to go, no, don't say that, say the Ukrainians are, like, living in paradise and they're winning. Which you can't really do all the time because, sometimes they are losing. But with that, I thank you so much for the support, enjoying the quality of news we try and deliver. And with that, we've reached the end of this question segment. If you have sent in a super chat, we will answer every single one of them by the end of the stream. And if you don't even have a comment, we will recognize them. And of course, thank you for the support to the channel, as every bit helps us to keep on running. But with that, we're now going to move on into the Southern Front news and the remainder of the news around the world. So starting off in Donetsk itself, we've seen again today that the 54th Brigade, which is stationed in the area of Donetsk, wiping out a T-64 tank on the Russian side with a Javelin. And so, here's the video. And we see here the Russian tank firing, and you can see the Z clearly marked on the front. And now we see the tank firing again into another house further down the street. And this tank doesn't know it, but its time is rather limited. We now see it firing into another house. And in typical Russian fashion, I don't really know how they're believing that infantry are getting this close to their tank, and we don't even see infantry support backing up this tank, which is just insane to me, that the Russians are so paranoid that they're shooting houses that close to the tank. If soldiers were that close, they'd be dead. Now we can see it firing on the move and moving around the rest of the village. It's now moving down another street and another street of destroyed houses. This village has been completely destroyed from top to bottom. And now it finally got hit. The good part of the video. And let's go back and watch that again. This is the best part of the video. The Javelin hits it kind of near the engine bay, and then the engine catches on fire and begins to burn. The tank starts grinding to a halt, and we're probably about to see the crew bail out here. Now, I don't see it yet, but I feel that any moment we'll probably see a crew member or two get out and bail. And I think we were seeing that right at the end of that video, and it's great to know that the Javelins are still being used and are knocking out tanks every once in a while whenever we see them being used on video. Of course, we know at the moment that the Ukrainians did make some ground in the Donetsk area and actually pushed into the Kievsky district of northern Donetsk, but beyond that, it appears that that attack has stalled and the Ukrainians have not made any ground from then on. It may be that the DPR and the Russian forces there were able to regain their defensive positions and are holding them right now, but until we get any more concrete information, that is an assumption. We're now going to be moving further down the front line and towards the area of Marinka, where we've seen a firefight from the Russian perspective. just going to let this video play. It is a little bit lengthy. I'll give a commentary here and there, but I believe that the sound of the firefight is a little bit more important than the commentary sometimes. And so, here's the video. Now, I would like y'all to note that we don't really hear a lot of return fire. We only hear fire from the Russian side as it sounds in the video. And it keeps on sounding like, with about a minute and 30 seconds passing in this video, this is nothing but fire from the Russians heading out in the direction of nothingness. We don't hear any return fire. And now that the Russians have stopped firing, we still don't hear any return fire. Now we hear the Russians shooting again in the distance.
Tatchkas.
What's insane to me, this is something totally not focusing on the firefight, but what's insane to me is that there's grass growing in the Ukrainian forests, like just in amongst the trees. If you ever come to Alabama and you go through the woods aren't this pretty, and they don't have grass growing in them. Usually it's just like straw and, you know, dead leaves and a rattlesnake or a copperhead in them, and it's just bleak under the tree line. But in Ukraine, they have these just like beautiful grass, which is very much nicer than what we have here in Alabama.
Ходить надо, блядь, сейчас быстро будет. Yes!
Now we can see them running around a little bit. It's still shooting. And then, okay, right there, we finally heard a little bit of return fire. It sounded like a couple of bullets bounced off the ground near him. So let's listen to that again and see if we can hear it a second time. Those were bullets bouncing off the ground. I think that may actually show that it's maybe a firefight, but if it is, well, how are the Ukrainians giving so little return fire? That's an interesting question for me, but we're going to let the video continue. And in this video, it seems like they're withdrawing from the fight. Don't y'all notice that? They're running backwards away from the firing instead of towards it, supposedly. Now you see them just standing around getting a breather. It takes a lot for the Russians to breathe. Some say they have gills, which means that they're actually not supposed to be on land, they're supposed to be in the water. We just heard a Russian over there in the left corner exploding in rage after he found out that his friend who got sent home only got a bag of buckwheat for his service. We'll watch that again. Let's watch that left corner. What happened over there? Okay, so he fired some kind of RPG. Now this guy is shooting with wild abandon into the woods again. Interesting. Of course, I think the video is incredibly staged, but it is something that was claimed to come out of the Donetsk area, and so I wanted to show it just in case if it was real, and I'm going to err on the side of this is not real. There was no return fire to speak of rather than 2 bullets, and that doesn't really count for anything. And so with that, we're now going to be moving out of the Donetsk area, and we're now going to be moving further down the front, and all the way past the Zaporizhia area, where nothing happened today, and we're about to see Ivan and his friend Makarov on the train to hell. We can see them using a World War II relic in the modern day. And so, here's the camera attached to their old anti-aircraft gun on an armored train. And I'm not making this up, it's literally an armored train like you would have seen in the Second World War. We can see them here rotating the gun. I'm trying to look all cool, but you can't really look cool on an armored train. And I don't really know what they think this would do, because if an airplane attacked them, does anyone even think that the airplane would be within range of an anti-aircraft gun like that? The answer is no, because guided munitions can hit vehicles from dozens of miles away, and so all this would do would just be a formality in between them and getting smacked. I mean, like, it's sad, it's pathetic, and it's crazy to think that the Russians in Russia are watching these kinds of videos and they're like, oh, we've got armored trains in Ukraine, we must be winning. That's so sad. Anyways, with that, we're now going to move out of the area of Melitopol, and we're now finally going to move to the Kherson area, where we've gotten some more interesting news. Starting off near the Davydiv Brid area, we saw a Forrest Gump appearance from the Ukrainian forces. We can see Forrest Gump crawling back out of the hole that he entered into in the Forrest Gump movie on the other side, and it appears he's been transported to 2022 on the front lines in Ukraine. And so, here's the video. And there he is.
Сынок, это война, очень пагубное дело. Но если ты запишешься к нам сегодня, в подарок ты получишь охуительные специальные операции.
I just gotta say this. I love how this Ukrainian soldier just crawled out of this hole and then he like starts monologuing to the camera. It almost seems like he's saying, you know, when you're in a firefight and you're tired. I think Rostov over there gets it. But anyways, when you're tired and you're just really worn out, you gotta get a Bang energy drink. It seems like he's doing that. It's funny to me for some reason because it's in the middle of an actual firefight.
Особенная операция, а не специальная.
Особенные операции и выстрелы там. Поэтому
he's now dispensing more words of wisdom.
Лучшая работа за $75.
And now he's crawling back into the hole and he's disappearing. This is really some funny stuff. This guy's got a natural level of comedy that's just hilarious, and I love it. I don't even know what he's saying, but it's just still funny nonetheless. And so that's the end of that video. Not really much to add there, but it was hilarious nonetheless. With that, we're now going to move on to our next bit of news, where we can then see further down the line that there has been some tough times for the Russians. And I say tough times with a great deal of lightness to the situation. We can see some Russians here sitting outside of a dugout. It looks like they're trying to eat some sunflower seeds, and they're about to become the very things that they're eating, sunflowers. And boom goes the dynamite, and I don't think any of them will be going back home. It's going to be a real big stretch if they do, and if they do go home, it's going to be in boxes. Now that was probably one of the most accurate shots I had seen, and we can see a Russian down there preparing to sleep. This was actually probably one of the more intense videos I had seen, and all joking aside, it looks like neither of them, being serious here, died instantly. But that explosion was incredibly close. So I think they're going to be in for a pretty painful death, honestly, just being all serious about it. But it was a pretty direct hit by the Ukrainians, and it did knock out more Russian forces, which, while it is kind of a bit of a nasty thing to see, is a necessary evil in a way to wipe out these Russians, to eventually push them back out of the country and reclaim the land that is Ukraine's. With that, we're now finally going to move back down towards the Kherson city area, where we've seen that the 36th Marine Brigade has been hitting the Russians once again with artillery. The artillery is the winning factor of the war for Ukraine, and we can see that this is not understated, as almost all the videos we've gotten today has been of Ukrainian artillery barrages. With that, we can see here a large foxhole that's filled with boxes of the Russians. I'm not sure if that's an ammunition cache, but we'll see here in a second. We can now see the artillery coming in, and it looks like it's hitting amongst the tree lines, trying to hit the Russian vehicles and maybe the Russian supplies. We can now see that it's hit something, and it looks like something just got some flight miles over there. We know that Russians love to get their vacation time in flight miles. We can now see the drone flying back over the area that appears to have been hit, and we can see the cache down there, and it looks like that vehicle may have been destroyed, but the cache looks by and large intact. So with that, we're now going to move on out of the Kherson area, and as far as these three bits of news, they don't really suggest much. The Russians have taken losses today, but we've also gotten no suggestion or indications that the Ukrainians have made an advance today in this area. And so it appears that their counterattack may be slowing down a little bit, but hopefully it can regain its speed and start racing towards Kherson once more. With that, we've now covered all of the news from the front lines within Ukraine, and we're now about to start moving out of Ukraine, and we're going to start in Russia first, and then make our way over to the United States, and cover all of our international news for the day. Starting off in the town of Talitsa, we actually saw a gas line exploding, and it's the second one, I believe, this week. It was a little bit of a fiery explosion, and considering that it was gas, I'm assuming that someone was eating a little bit too much of beans. And so here we can see the gas explosion. I'd also like to show you the average intelligence of the Russians, who decided to pull over their cars right here and open up the doors and get out to watch the beautiful fire right up close. I think most of these people got seared eyebrows in the end, and we can see the Russian fire brigades down there at the end of the street trying to set up to take out the fire, but I think that their efforts were largely ended right here as this fireball expanded outwards towards the street. That was a big explosion. We can now see the recreation of the Tsar bomb on a much smaller scale as the mushroom cloud begins to rise and freaks out all the kids of the area, and most likely the fire department, which looks like they haven't even been able to set up their vehicles yet and actually fight the fire. We can now see it from another perspective, and once again it looks as impressive here as it did from the other two perspectives. Quite an explosion to be sure. With that, we're now going to move on from this video and into the next one in Russia. That one, there's not really much to add. It was just a gas pipe explosion, most likely caused by saboteurs. We're now about to move into Moscow, where we've gotten some really big news. The Z appears to be on his deathbed, apparently, as the Russian government is now going to start trying to ditch the Z symbol. According to this news article, which seems to be largely true from what I can tell, but take it with a grain of salt, it is saying that the Russians apparently are dropping the Z and V symbols, which have been heavily used by the government in Russia, because it doesn't really seem to be catching on with the public. And so it appears that they're going to try and rebrand the war with a brand new symbol and try and get people on board with that one instead. I'm not really sure about the validity of this news, but we will see in the coming weeks if that was true and if the Russians are going to try and rebrand the war with a different symbol rather than the Z. With that, we're now going to move out of Russia, and we're now going to move into Belarus, where we've heard two interesting things today. Starting off, we can get an idea that the Russian supply situation is terrible, as Belarus, which is Russia's puppet, has now declared that they will provide equipment to Russia if needed. This will include the entire gamut of equipment, and of course this was said by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine today, but this could include the entire gamut of equipment that they might need. Tanks, planes, anything that the Russians may request, the Belarusians will provide. The Belarusians don't have a lot of equipment, but that already gives us an idea of how poorly the Russians are off, considering that they're now having to ask their smaller and much weaker puppet states for equipment to help them try and continue on this war, and I believe that this is going to pull Belarus entirely out of this war, as it will now become a supply, I guess you could say, supply land for the Russian forces as they continue on this fight, and the Belarusian forces may be depleted of their own equipment and might not be able to enter the war because of that. So very interesting. And of course, it is showing that the Russians are running out of equipment for sure, now that Belarus is having to step up and offer to provide equipment, which we know isn't actually a kind offer. It's most likely something that the Russians said they will publicly do, and they'll like it. With that, we're now going to move on to our second bit of news in Belarus, where we see a picture of a young Belarusian boy that has come to Ukraine to fight. A 17-year-old friend of this kid, he looks like a kid, he may be old enough to serve, but his name was Dmitry Stakovsky, and he committed suicide last year after an interrogation by the Belarusian officials. His friend Sasha here, which is in this picture, actually managed to escape after spending 11 months in a Belarusian prison, and he's pretty much just a kid. And so now he's fled to Ukraine, and he's serving in the armed forces of the country and helping to defend Ukraine against the Russians, and most likely in the future, the Belarusians. Considering that they will be providing their equipment, they might as well be considered accessories in this war. So I wish him the best of luck, and I hope that he is able to avenge his friend's death that was pretty much caused indirectly by the Belarusians. With that, we're now going to move out of Belarus, and we're now going to move to Brussels, which is the headquarters of the European Union, where we have seen today that the Belarusians, well, not the Belarusians, the European Union as a whole said that they will work to increase support to Ukraine and try and get even more equipment, arms, and economic aid to them as fast as possible. The Reddit post right here just confirms that and brings you to a news article speaking about that. It is a huge step forward for the European Union, which has been providing a decent amount of support through its, I guess you could say, attached countries, but by and large, has not been producing as much support as the United States. Hopefully they're able to change that in the future and try and get even more support into Ukraine. Of course, Ukraine is always greatly appreciative to everyone who's provided any level of support, but more support is necessary from everyone in the world, and so I hope that the United States, as well as the European Union here, does ramp up the amount of support they're giving and help the Ukrainians to take the initiative and finally start pushing those counterattacks that they desperately need to. It's an ideal time during this war, and hopefully it will all be able to come together. With that, we've already covered the other bit earlier in the news. We actually covered the energy demands per country in the European Union, and so we're going to skip over that one, and we're now going to move all the way across the sea to the United States of America, where we've heard two very interesting pieces of news. Starting off with Boston, we heard that Boston Dynamics is going to let loose the dogs of war and have sent over 2 of their robot dogs to help with the demining operations inside of Ukraine. And so here's a video of one of these robots. Of course, this is at an earlier time, and showing how it works. Here's the video. We can see how the robot is able to pick up stuff. Right here in this instance, it is laundry. And this is something that I've been a huge fan of for quite some while. I believe that Boston Dynamics is one of the leading, I guess you could say, organizations in the world in producing modern and advanced equipment, much like these, I guess you could say, cyber dogs. We can now see it opening up a door. Putin's worst nightmare, as this thing could get into his office. These things are a little bit creepy, but this is a, as you say, montage of the demonstration of how... We can now see it using chalk. When you see that it wrote out Boston Dynamics on the ground entirely on its own, well, of course, probably with a decent amount of programming, but it is really crazy to see that they're going to be sending over 2 of those robots that are incredibly capable to help out the Ukrainians with demining operations. Hopefully it does succeed in its task, and if it does, that will start to pave the way for these things to be entering the modern world as pretty much like a mass-produced robot. Of course, they're still incredibly expensive, and I think when I say mass-produced, they'll most likely be winding up in service with foreign governments, most likely in a military role or some kind of a civilian role in a hospital or something like that, a company that can actually incur the cost of getting these things. But I do think they will be a massive improvement to the workforce around the world and also the militaries around the world, as these things have been proven to carry a decent amount of weight. With that, we're now going to move further down the coastline to Washington, D.C., where we can see that the United States has stated today that they're going to be giving another $450 million in support to Ukraine, and that's going to include an additional 4 HIMARS MLRS systems. Once again, a great improvement, and that is another 4 MLRSs of a very good degree that can fire some 50 miles out from its original starting point that will be given to Ukraine. Once again, great support by the United States. I hope that they continue to provide more and better equipment as the war continues on. But in terms of MLRSs, the M142 and the M270s are about as good as it can get. And so with that, we'll be waiting to see the video and picture evidence of those arriving in Ukraine and actually being used. And with that, we're now going to go full circle back to Kyiv, where I'm actually going to spend a moment to pull up the President of Ukraine's office. President of Ukraine office. And we're going to go to his website and see that if he has uploaded a video address for the day. It looks like he has not. It looks like there was a video address for the educational institutions of Israel, but this video, which is dated from today, was actually yesterday's address. And so sadly, we will not be having an address from President Zelensky today. But I do thank you very much, once again, for watching, and that does conclude tonight's news. If you did enjoy it and you are a new viewer to this channel, please make sure to subscribe. We do run these streams nightly at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, covering the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine, and we also upload daily summaries showing some of the shorter highlight clips of the things that have been happening in the country today. And so with that, I thank you all once again for watching, and we're now going to move into the question segment where we're going to answer everyone's live chat questions, and well, not everyone's live chat questions. We're going to answer every super chat, and we're also going to answer as many live chat questions as possible. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
And it is now time for the questions. So first up, let me recognize a super chat left without a comment from DT, who puts in a $20 donation. Thank you very much, DT, for your contribution to the channel and helping us to keep running. So thank you very much for that. And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Uncle Tababite, who says, coffee and spam and beer. Drink Kyoto Matcha IPA green tea tonight. It's an odd flavor for a beer, but I'm guessing healthy brew. I just like to keep trying them out. Which brewski do you both like? And I'll answer for myself real quick. I actually don't drink a beer, but I have tried one before. And I believe it was Corona Extra, I think. I'm not sure, though.
I thank you for the support. To answer on my end, I am actually not able to drink, so sadly, I don't drink. That's something that's always shocking. And here we go. Here it starts. I'm 20, and here goes everyone in the live chat going, "Oh my God, he's 20." I'm 20. And so unfortunately, I cannot drink beer to be able to answer that question. If I was able to answer it, someone somewhere would be violating the law. So unfortunately, I won't be able to answer that part of the question. But coffee, spam, and beer sounds like a combination for some bad gas, kind of like we saw in Russia today over there in the little small village of Talitsa. So I think that would be a very interesting combination to try. I think that may actually be a weapon in some areas of the world and illegal. But I do thank you very much for the support, and I thank you for providing us with a beer, spam, and coffee fund. That's a brand new fund, and it seems to be a conglomerate of many other different kinds of funds. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support. And can you reread that question just to make sure I covered every part of it, Matthew?
Yes, Uncle Tababite said, coffee and spam and beer. I drank Kyoto Matcha IPA green tea tonight. It's an odd flavor for beer, but I'm guessing it's a healthy brew. I just like trying them out. Which brewski do you both like?
Now, that was the thing that I was actually wanting to cover right there, is the matcha thing. I've had matcha before, matcha tea, and I have to say, matcha gives me massive headaches. I don't know why, but I get massive migraines when I drink matcha tea to the point that I can physically no longer operate. And so I do thank you for the support, but if I had a matcha tea, I would literally be out of it. I would be like Apollo in the Rocky IV movie when Draco beat him up in the ring. I would literally die. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support, and I hope that does address the comment. And of course, we're appreciative to everyone who supports this channel and helps us to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from John Gonzalez, who says, "This is to help combat the Russian bots. Keep up the good work."
Well, thank you so much for the support, John. And of course, we try our best to combat the Russian bots. We once again reset, well, I'm not going to say what we did, but we did make sure that the stream would be able to run tonight after we got DDoS attacked within minutes, and it looks like we haven't been interrupted so far. Fingers crossed that continues on to be the way it is. But we are, of course, always appreciative of everyone who continues to support this channel, and with that kind of support, we will be able to continue defeating the Russian bots and keep these streams going. And so with that, I thank you once again for the wondrous support that everyone gives us to be able to keep on running this stream, and with that, we are on to the next question.
And up next, we have a super chat from Lance Montgomery, who puts in a $17.76 donation, and that's very clever, Lance. I think you did that last night as well. That's still pretty cool. Lance says, "Potato-faced orc foreign minister Lavrov dodged a question from a BBC reporter like it was a bar of soap. Reporter asked if there would be more invasions if orcs launch invasion number 2. Where is it?"
How do you understand that question to be phrased near the end when he said the second invasion? How did you take that, Matthew?
Let's see here. If orcs launch invasion number 2, I could take that to mean either opening a new front or invading a different country. I'm not really sure.
I was thinking it may be one of the two. I'll try and answer it both ways just to play it safe. If the Russians invaded a second country, that would most likely overextend the Russians. We already see that they're overextended now, much less trying to run 2 wars on 2 separate fronts. So I think that even if it was a weaker country, like, say, Finland, and when I say weaker, it's not to a discredit of the people of that country. It's not like I'm saying they're inherently a weak people. I'm saying just militarily, in terms of size and what their military is composed of, compared to the Russians on paper, they are weaker. But still at that, if they try to open up a second front, even with a weaker nation like Finland, I still don't think it would go well for them. And if they're talking about opening up a second front in Ukraine, I don't think that'd go well for them either, pretty much for the same reason that they just don't have the ability to carry through on a second front right now due to their supply line issues, and also just the way their command structure is set up. It's highly inefficient, highly disorganized, and there's not a lot of communication amongst the units on the front. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. And I see a lot of people saying Lithuania, so we'll cover that. Lithuania is not even in the picture as far as I'm concerned. It's not even a target. Lithuania is a NATO state, which means that it has Article 5 protection, meaning that an attack on it is an attack on the rest of NATO, and the rest of NATO, including the behemoth of the United States, being the military juggernaut it is, would respond to the Russian attack, and that would lead the Russians into World War III and imminent destruction, as there's really no way they could stand up to the might of both the European continent and also the United States bearing down on it at the same time. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question in 3 different aspects, and I once again thank you so much for the support. It does help our channel to keep on running, and I hope that was a pretty decent answer to the question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And Enforcer, it does look like Lance did clarify his question. He said he was referring to if Russia invaded another nation.
All right, and so I kind of did answer on that one a little bit. If it's Lithuania, that's NATO going to war with Russia and absolutely curb stomping them. And then if they try to invade Finland, I don't even think they'd be able to carry through on that, even with Finland being a neutral country with no actual friends, rather than the British, who said they would defend Finland. And then that wouldn't drag in NATO, because that would be Britain voluntarily entering a war on its own. The Finns would be able to hold them off on their own as well. And so I think that the Russians are kind of have their hands tied right now, and this is really all that they can do. They're mustering all of their strength possible to just try and take one city right now. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have another $17.76 donation from Lance Montgomery, who says Macron has eaten too many snails if he believes giving an inch to Russia is a viable solution. Ankle-grabbing responses will only embolden the orcs. Macron equal a great president for Vichy France.
Well, thank you very much for the support. I don't really try and weigh into politics too much in any country, but one thing I can say is that Macron is like the modern day Neville Chamberlain and how he's dealing with this war. He's literally saying the exact same things that Chamberlain said. If we appease the Nazis, you know, which are now the Russians, then there'll be peace in our time. I mean, everyone knows that the greatest joke ever said was from Neville Chamberlain when he said there would be peace in our time. And that's what Macron is trying to do right now in the modern day. And I think that it has absolutely no merit. Historically, it has not worked in World War II and has not worked in any other time in history when countries would attempt to appease people, like during the Napoleonic Wars when the coalitions, you know, about the 17 of them, and that's a massive exaggeration, but each time the coalitions would appease Napoleon in France, it never ended anything. There was always something else that would occur that would lead the coalition to reform and then go to war with France again. And so far, historically, appeasement's never really worked, and it won't work in this situation. And so I think Macron has no historical basis or merit to be saying the stuff he's saying, because it's pretty much a non-viable solution to the issue long-term or in the short term. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does weigh in on it. And, you know, honestly, just to kind of weigh in on politics here a little bit, this isn't really weighing in on politics. This is just weighing in on an observation. For everyone to have been saying you can't elect Le Pen in France because she's going to be pro-Russian, I would honestly say that Macron seems quite pro-Russian with the statements he's saying here, with trying to appease them and literally hand them over land in Ukraine for a temporary peace. That's kind of what I'm thinking right now, and hopefully that's not getting too political. That's just kind of weighing the two sides. I don't know a lot about Le Pen, but for everyone to be calling her a pro-Russian, and Macron doing what he's doing, I wonder what on earth she would be doing to be called a pro-Russian compared to Macron. But with that, I hope that does address the question. And once again, thank you so much for the support. And I am all in line with no appeasement whatsoever and push the Russians back out. And so I hope that does answer it. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And moving on, we have a $15 super chat from Uncle Tababite. And Uncle Tababite, thank you very much for your continued support as well. And he says, I got fresh, amazing coffee from a friend, Cafe Barraco from Philippines. It's so fresh and as tasty as the Hawaiian blends that we get. I hope you get to try the various blends as well. We need coffee to function. And yes, we definitely do.
And I can agree entirely with that, Uncle Tababite. That is 100% true. And I'm not really one to try exotic coffee. I would love to, and I think I may start trying to do that in the future. Usually, if it's coffee, it smells like coffee, and it tastes like coffee, it's coffee to me. But that is really interesting to hear that apparently the Philippines coffee is as fresh and tasty as the Hawaiian blends, and we may try that out sometime. Matthew is kind of the one in between the two of us that does a lot of coffee connoisseuring, and so with that kind of leads me into thinking about Hawaii, and I know that's going to get way off kilter with what's been going on, but interestingly enough, Hawaii actually became a part of the United States because businessmen from the United States just kind of wandered out there when Hawaii was actually a kingdom, and they're like, hey, this place is perfect to grow like sugarcane, pineapples, and coffee on. And so slowly over time, they managed to pretty much turn Hawaii into a business conglomerate pretty much, and they were able to actually kind of oust the royal family of Hawaii and turn it into a U.S. territory by the U.S. government coming out there and annexing it. It's a really interesting story, and it's something that the native Hawaiians still hold as pretty much their defining history to this day. It's a very interesting thing, and I highly suggest looking into it because it's an example, I guess you could say, of a lesser-known page in world history because no one really knows how Hawaii came to be American by and large. And so with that, we're now going to move on to the next question. I thank you so much for the support, Uncle Tababite, and also sharing us an idea as to where to get some nice coffee. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $20 super chat from Yoli H, who says, does Russia know the geography? Oh, hold on, let me start over on that one. Whoops. Does Russia know the geography land of Ukraine, or do they use maps to get through?
That's kind of I think the way you're asking that, you're asking if the Russians know the lay of the land or if they're using maps. It's standard in the military, regardless if you know the lay of the land or not, to use maps. We know that the Russians are using pretty dated ones from the late 80s or the early 80s, from what we can tell, for the most part. And that's why they dug in the Chernobyl areas, because it wasn't marked as an exclusion zone. But I think, to answer that question the best I can, they are using maps, and I don't think any of them actually know the lay of the land well enough. And once again, you do have to remember that the modern world is such a large area and so expansive that even if one commander was to know the lay of the land somewhere like Chuhuiv, if he was then moved down to the Donetsk area, he would be completely blind as to what was going on and then would be relegated to using a map. And so, to answer that question, by and large, it's the standard principle to use a map, and so I think that's what they're doing here. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, Yoli H. You've been around forever and supporting the stream an incredibly good bit, and always active in the chat. And we're always appreciative of having longtime viewers here who do enjoy this channel and really love the Lee Spring Army. And so thank you once again for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have an $11 super chat from Manuel Suezo, who says, for more information about the war, you can use the NASA fire tracking system. The system records the bombed zones.
I have seen that, and I have looked at it a little bit, but I generally don't use it because there's so little time already with what I do that trying to add that in and look at that as well would make me be a no-lifer, and I would be getting up at the very beginning of the morning and starting work on this without working on college or running errands that I have to run or anything like that. And so in that instance, I do know what you're talking about, and I have seen it before, and before the Great Schism, that was actually suggested to me, but sadly, just due to time constraints, I was never able to use it, and I'm still not able to use it. But I do thank you for the support and the suggestion, and I highly suggest that a lot of our viewers go and check that map out in y'all's free time if y'all would like to see the fire map, because it actually does give a pretty good idea of where the front lines are based off of where fires are burning. And so with that, hope that does address the comment, and we're on to the next question, and thank you once again for the support.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Santiago Flores, who says, coffee and pizza, boys, you earned it.
Well, I thank you so much for the coffee and pizza, and I thank you so much for saying we've earned it. I think we're just kind of doing our work here on this channel as usual, but I'm always greatly appreciative of everyone and their support of this channel and helping us to be able to keep on doing it. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support, and we will get some coffee and some pizza, and with that, we are on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $50 super chat from Russell, who says, thanks for all the hard work. Have you come across evidence of widespread deployment of 900,000 men that Ukraine says must stay in country for war? In World War II, entire cities would hand dig defenses. FYI, matcha tea high is high in histamine, a migraine trigger.
Now, thank you so much for clarifying the whole thing about the histamine in the matcha tea. It created a terrible headache for me every time I drank it. I kind of have a headache right now, and I haven't even been near matcha tea. But to answer that question, I have not come across evidence about the 900,000 men army or the million-man army. It seems to be something that's kind of in the background, and I have checked with Starsky on that one on stream, and he also said he has no idea about that. And if a Ukrainian officer in the Ukrainian military has no idea about something like that, which would be huge news, I would assume that it is unfortunately not true. And you're absolutely correct. There is a lot of footage and a lot of historical evidence to show that entire cities in World War II would get involved in constructing earthworks for its defense and also doing other things to try and defend the city the best they can. And so I thank you so much for the massive amount of support. It helps out our channel a great deal and helps us to keep running. And I'm sorry I couldn't answer that question all too well because we don't have any evidence to show that they exist, but I do thank you very much for asking it. And with that, we're on to the next one, and thank you once again.
And moving on, we have a $20 super chat from Gary Robbins, who says, please tell the story about the Lee Spring Army.
All right, and so it's come around time again to talk about how the Lee Spring Army came to be. Many, many months ago, in a time far, far away from here, not a galaxy or anything, it's the same place, sitting in the same chair, I was looking at a Ukraine war stream, and I had put together the news, and we were looking at a destroyed Pantsir anti-air system. It was very early on in the war, and it was sitting in the field, and it was burning a little bit, and this guy was walking around the pansier, and he came around to the back side of the vehicle, and there, clear as day, I don't know what did that, but there, clear as day, was a leaf spring suspension system holding up the wheels. And I said, wow. I said, that is ancient. I don't think anyone in the world uses leaf springs anymore. That is just archaic. I didn't know it at the time, but a lot of vehicles still use leaf springs all around the world, and they're still made with them. And I pulled that up right after I said that, because I said, I don't think that's a true statement. I don't know a lot about suspension. And so everyone in the chat started roasting me and grilling me over the whole entire leaf spring thing. And so actually it was really hilarious to me. I thought it was funny that everyone, got like militant over a suspension system. And so after that, it just kind of started to culminate into a joke. And then someone in the chat said Lee Spring Army, and that just stuck. And so that's how he came up with the Lee Spring Army. And that's why everyone on this channel who watches it and is like a loyal, dedicated fan to the thing is called a member of the Lee Spring Army, is because of that one joke spanning back almost over 100 days now that started within the first days of the war. And so with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope you all have enjoyed the recounting and the story of how the Lee Spring Army came to be. That was the origins of the group that would begin to do incredible things like raising $350,000 in support of Ukraine. And so with that, thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and thank you so much once again for the support.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Anthony, who says, can Russia buy or take military equipment from former USSR states like Kazakhstan, Belarus, Uzbekistan, etc.?
Yes, they could take equipment from Kazakhstan and other countries like that. I heard Mandy say Kazakhstan. I was like, oh man, I've never heard that one before, but I do understand why you're saying it. There's a lot of countries down there that sound a lot like that, like Turkmenistan and Tajikistan, and so you would think that it's Kazakhstan, but it's actually Kazakhstan. I actually got a pretty good. I actually got a pretty good laugh out of that one, but it's fine, Matthew. I've said Kharkiv and stuff before, so it's fine. But anyways, moving on to answer that question, Kazakhstan and all of the other Stan series countries are still heavily aligned with the Russians, and so I do believe that they may lend equipment, but some of them may be more reluctant, like the countries that are not directly bordering Russia, like the rest of the Stans except for Kazakhstan, most likely would think about it and maybe not give much. But Kazakhstan, which is almost still directly tied to Russia, would send a decent amount of arms to Russia. Right now, the current government owes their existence to the Russians, as the Russian military stepped in just under a year ago to make sure that the current government kept in place. So with that, I thank you so much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question in brief. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Jeff Curtis, who says, Enforcer, please comment. Doesn't it seem absolutely necessary that Ukrainian not just defend and recover invaded territory, but push the orcs well and far within the Russian border, a DMZ?
I don't think that would be necessarily smart for the Ukrainians to do. If the Ukrainians are able to conduct a counterattack and push the Russians back to their border, that is one thing. To then start pushing them into Russia is a whole entire other thing. That's going to make it look like to the Russian public that the situation is entirely out of control and the government isn't doing enough, and that will lead to the government most likely calling on a full mobilization and bringing the whole weight of their military to bear on Ukraine, which, while we see that 220,000 Russian soldiers aren't able to do much, bringing down the weight of 1.3 million soldiers across the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, regardless of how poorly put together they are, would be a human wave strategy, which is synonymous with the Russians, and it will most likely lead to Ukraine's defeat. And so in the process of getting too drunk on victory, they would pretty much be ensuring their long-term defeat. And so I don't think it would be smart for them to push into Russia, because it would most likely lead to the Russians having to incur a much stronger response to try and look like they have some control of the situation. So with that is once again my assumption. I could be wrong. It could be a smart thing for the Ukrainians to do, but in my opinion, it's going to lead to disastrous results. And so with that, thank you once again. I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from Devin Betterton, who says, Glory to Ukraine.
And also, Slava Ukraini. And thank you so much once again for the support. It does help this channel a lot, and it helps us to keep running. And of course, like PBS is, without viewers like y'all, this channel wouldn't be able to keep running. And so thank you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $10 super chat from our in-house decoder, WF2U, who says, Enforcer, plain language Morse code is not deciphered. Morse signals sound just like speech to an experienced Morse operator. You just write down as you hear it. WF2U is my FCC radio call sign.
Well, thank you very much for the support. And it is interesting to hear that apparently it just becomes like a second language to people who learn Morse. I actually thought it was something that you still have to kind of like decode or decipher, but it is really cool to hear that you can pretty much just listen to it like it's a normal language. And so thank you very much once again for the support. And what was his little call sign that he said again, Matthew?
It's actually his username, WF2U.
And that's really cool. I didn't actually know that either. And so thank you very much once again for the support, WF2U. And I thank you so much once again for being our in-house expert on Morse code deciphering. And so with that, we're on to the next question. And I thank you very much for the support once again.
And next up, we have a $10 super chat from Ted Agens, or Agens. I'm still not sure how to pronounce it. Please correct me if I'm mispronouncing it. Who says, sorry I tuned in late. In reference to the Tajka battery and the man pads, it's standard practice to have a duck hunter attached to high-value systems. Was done all the time in my 20 years in the U.S. Army FA.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and I thank you for clarifying why the random Stinger man was just standing around the Tatchka battery. Of course, that is good to know, and it's great to know that the Ukrainians do take those extra kind of precautions that Western countries do, like the United States, and making sure that those kinds of valuable weapon systems are protected by soldiers on the ground who are able to shoot down drones or aircraft or whatever may be coming their way. And so thank you very much for clarifying that. I actually didn't know that. And it's good to know that we do have experienced veterans in the house that have enough experience to let me know why they're doing such a thing like that. And so thank you once again. And with that, I hope that did address the comment, and we're on to the next question. And thank you once again for the support.
And I see that Ted said, he said, say Ajuns. So Ted Ajuns, I got it. So thank you very much for the support. And moving on to the next super chat, we have a $5 donation from VMan29397, who says, I'm proud to have donated to Ukrainian relief, and I'm proud my favorite NFL team has donated to Ukraine. Do you know which team that is?
Unfortunately, I do not. I don't follow a lot of sports much, so sadly I couldn't really tell you. And unfortunately, that's something that a lot of my longtime channel viewers do know, is that I haven't really had a lot of time right now to look at sports, and I never really looked at sports growing up. I was kind of the person who, like, whenever a high school football game would come around, or college football night or NFL football would come around, I was just kind of like, it's a sport. It's it just is what it is. So sadly, I never really looked at sports much. And so unfortunately, I'm going to have to declare ignorance on that one, because I don't know which football team has done that. But I do thank you very much for the support and the question, but sadly, due to my own ignorance on sports, I won't be able to answer it. But it looks like someone just said Steelers. And don't you dare call that football team a bunch of Steelers. We call Russian soldiers Steelers. Come on now. And so with that, I hope y'all caught on the joke there. And I thank y'all very much for the support, and I hope that did address the comment a bit. And I'm glad we did get an answer there. Now people are saying Packers and some other teams. I don't know if it was the Steelers, but I do thank you for the support. And with that, we're moving on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 donation from Khan Azur, who says, keep up the great work. I talked to my family in Poland, and they are all doing what they can to help out with the refugee situation. God bless Ukraine.
Now, thank you so much for the support, and it's wonderful to hear that you do have family in Poland, and they are helping out the best they can as well with that situation in Ukraine. Of course, it's incredibly important that everyone around the world tries to chip in just a bit to help out Ukraine and make sure that they come out in this thing on top and will become a part of NATO. That's, of course, kind of the end goal of this whole thing. Whether they become a part of NATO or not is a whole other question, but that should kind of be the goal that everyone in the world is striving for. And so I thank you once again for the support to our channel and helping us to keep on running. And it's wonderful to hear that your family is also over there trying to do the best service they can in helping out Ukraine. And so thank you very much for the support and the nice little story there. It was really nice to hear. And with that, we are on to the next question.
And up next, we have an $8 donation from NOYDB, who says, "Say it. She sells seashells by the Salish seashore, Kazakhstan."
And let me say that real quick. Let me try and say it. She sells seashells by the Salish seashore, Kazakhstan. Honestly, I like Kazakhstan. For some reason, it sounds better. But I do thank you so much for the support in a YPD, and I hope that does address the comment, and I hope we both read it off and showed you that we both failed it at the first attempt. And so with that, we're on to the next question.
And up next, we have a $5 super chat from Coaching Addiction, who says, "Hi, Enforcer. Dead on destroying. Can you explain what happened with this blockade of Kaliningrad? Thank you."
Kaliningrad. Kaliningrad. Oh, man. Oh, yeah, there we go. I'm sorry.